Bring Them Home, written by HFX321. The man screamed in terror. "No! Please, no! I can still work! Please don't!" But his captors knew no mercy. Once they made sure that his leg was indeed broken, they shot the man and tossed his corpse in front of his fellow slaves. "Clean it up," one of the pirates barked. Euron grabbed the dead man's arms and another reached for the legs. They carried the body to the airlock and gently lowered him right in front of the seal. Then they grabbed onto the rails and held on for dear life, as the pirates had a tendency to flush out healthy slaves with the corpse, just for a giggle. The door opened and vacuum took the body. The two men held strong, and when the exit was sealed again, they returned to work. Asteroid mining was a difficult task, even in the best of circumstances. It required sensitive machinery, consummate professionals, and a lot of patience to avoid wrecking the whole thing. Needless to say, pirates using slave labour did not fulfill these qualifications. Their patience was thin, and they also decided that meat was cheaper than machine, so why bother with the latter? Euron swung his pickaxe on the rock. He had been here for 6 months already, and he knew he cannot last much longer. His body still held on, despite the mild injuries and the meagre food, but with each swing of his axe, he also chipped away a part of his soul. It was 6 months ago that the defences of the Telvan Assembly cracked. They had always been dancing on the knife's edge. On one side, they bordered a militaristic great power. On the other, they faced a grey zone, an area of lawlessness where cruelty and violence reigned. The Assembly waltzed with skill for 400 years. Their quick and agile fleets were repelling raids with great prowess, while they have shown their weaker side to their mighty neighbour, mollifying them by severely limiting their own military strength. It was a long dance, and in time, even the most skilled dancer is meant to miss a step. So it happened that after a stunning victory over the Reavers, the Directorate of the Assembly ordered the mothballing of an entire fleet to make sure that their powerful neighbour won't get the wrong ideas. Little did they know that a new threat, a pirate king, has emerged in the wilderness of the Grey Zone. A man who himself knew how to waltz. His first attack was merely a diversion. It was meant to be routed decisively. His second attack shocked all the Telvans. He swept in and destroyed the famed 2nd and 5th fleets in one fell swoop. The Assembly mobilised, but it was far too late to save the outer colonies. Dozens of planets and hundreds of millions of souls fell to the mercy of madmen. Savagery and plunder came in their wake. Millions of men, women and children were dragged away in dark ships. Millions more were murdered in wanton acts of cruelty. Euron himself was captured on Salem 5. His visit to the planet was planned to last a month of leisure and beauty. It was cut short when an armoured hand knocked him to the ground and pulled him to the belly of a filthy vessel. He thought about his brother, a career soldier. He was always so serious about defending their home. They haven't talked for months before his capture. Nothing severe, just the drift of life. Euron dearly hoped that his brother wasn't stationed at the outer colonies at the time of the attack, for he surely would not allow himself to be captured, although he thought that might have been the better fate. There were whispers among the new arrivals. They said that help was on its way. Some said that the Telvan forces had turned the tide and were now driving back the Corsairs. Others even went as far as to claim that their powerful neighbour was coming to the rescue. To think that the humans would come to their aid, what a ridiculous notion. And yet they kept claiming that freedom was near. Yeron knew they were full of crap, or rather that they'd clung to false hope. He would not do the same. It brings nothing but despair. No rescue would come. He wiped away sweat and tears from his eyes and glanced towards the corridor. He always did that at this particular time of his shift, for the only light currently shining in his life was about to pass in front of the mining shafts. And she came, the most beautiful woman Yeron had ever seen. She took a peek at the miners and smiled at Yeron. Yeron's heart skipped a beat. This time, not because of the smile, but because he noticed something that he dearly hoped the pirates would not notice. A soft limp in the girl's stride. Enra walked while trying to force the pain out of her mind. She respectfully bowed to the pirate's scum she passed on her way. Then she entered a side corridor and slumped to the ground. She uncovered her right leg and looked at it with revulsion. The cut that she suffered during a cave-in a month ago has been infected. Her blue flesh turned to yellow around the wound and pus was seeping from it. She has managed to hide it from her captors so far. She was given an office job after her capture, keeping records of the mined resources, for the Corsairs trusted each other far less than their slaves. So Enra was able to sit a lot and rest her leg, but it did not help with the infection. She urgently needed medication. Alarms rang out, indicating the end of the shift. The miners rushed out of their stations. They needed to hurry if they wanted to eat, for their captors were miserly even with their food. Not to mention that on occasions they played a cruel game, where they refused to give out full rations, goading the captives to fight each other for scraps. Yeron rushed, but not to the mess hall. He moved against a sea of slaves, squeezing himself through the shifting mass. He was desperately searching until he found her in a tight corridor. Yeron crouching beside Enra as she quickly hid her injury. "How bad?" he asked. She looked at him with fear in her eyes. "What? Nothing's wrong," she protested. "We have to get to the mess hall. They can't find you like this." The girl closed her eyes and nodded. "Can you walk? Let me give you a hand." "You can't. They will notice." They walked side by side. They had to catch up with the crowd, lest they raise suspicion. Enra set the pace. She braved on and pushed her torn leg beyond its limit. Thankfully, they reached their fellow captives before the armed guards closed the line. The mass of slaves were funneled through a thin doorway. They were pushing and clawing at each other as they hurried to eat. Yeron and Enra did not join the tussle, so they entered last. They went to one of the long metal tables on the side. They just sat down when the food began to arrive. A valve was turned and the pipes above the tables vomited a viscous grey slop. It was disgusting and of very questionable content, but the prisoners lunged at it as if it was the chef's masterwork. Today, the pirates were in a generous mood, or maybe they had received extra supplies, so the food was enough for everyone. Geron leaned to Enra. "Your leg," he whispered. "Something must be—" "Don't!" She looked around, but their neighbours were stuffing their faces, and the patrols were further away. "I'll carry on. Nothing can be done about it." Geron wanted to hug the girl, but who knew how the pirates would react to such affection? They weren't only ruling over their bodies, they wanted to break their spirits, to make them fear each other, to make them sell out to the other for scraps. "Look," he said, "I think they keep medicine at the—" The mining complex was rocked in its hole. It wasn't a rarity, so neither the pirates nor their captives gave it much attention. But then a second tremble came, and a third. Then the lights were cut. At this point, all the Telvans were hiding under the tables. An eerie silence fell on the hall. Some of the pirates cursed and radioed their ilk. A gunshot rang out, and a pirate fell to the ground with a wet thud, his jaw completely ripped from his face. Flashlights were lit as the Corsairs searched the area. Guards cussed out her comrades, thinking it was one of them who pulled off a sneaky assassination. Suddenly, a flashlight illuminated a form. It was large and black, and bore a small white bird on its chest. Death has come for the Corsairs. Well-aimed shots thundered, and every single one of them fell a slaver. They answered as best as they could muster in the dark, but they were outmatched. Black shapes rushed forward in the almost complete darkness, and when their guns rested, their blades worked. Throats were slit, and guts were rendered, as the relentless attackers mauled their prey. The mining complex held more than 1,000 pirates, and 8 times as many slaves. The assault was over in 10 minutes. The lights came back on, and the black-clad fighters herded the Telvans to their own ships. They followed their new masters in complete silence, for what they had seen was far beyond their comprehension. The Corsairs lorded over their lives and deaths for so long, and now they all lay broken, snuffed out in the blink of an eye. But there was more. The pirates were flesh and blood. They were spite and laughter, and when they were in a good mood, they could be bargained with. These new figures were more akin to machines. They hid their faces behind their helmets, gave short and firm orders, but beyond that, they did not care for their prize. No kicks, no goading, no celebration of their victory. It was as if they were carved from black marble, sculpted for a singular purpose. Geron helped Enra step on the ramp that led into one of the black ships. He tried to hide his aid as best as he could, but something in him knew that the guard standing by the ramp noticed it. They were led deep into the belly of the ship, to a large, mostly empty room that held mattresses and blankets. The Telvans chose their spots to lay, leaving large gaps between themselves, for they were wary of each other, and they were terrified of their new owners. Enra looked around before checking her wound. "Well, this did not help." Geron hugged her close. "It is going to be all right, I promise." Enra's tearful face rested on his chest. The connection felt like soothing balm to the soul for both of them. Their relief was cut short as 3 black-clad forms entered the room. The trio visited each Telvan, one after the other. They used a strange machine to draw the blood of the captives. It was a test, and most of them seemingly passed it. They were given actual food and have been left to their devices. Some, however, were administered a solution from a syringe. These Telvan fell limp a minute later and did not move again. The trio reached a man near Yeron and Enra. They drew his blood, waited for the results, and the one in the middle nodded to the one on his right. He pulled out a syringe. The man started to beg. "No, no, please don't. I am fine. I can work for you." The warrior on the left stepped behind him and put him in a deadlock. "Please don't. I am fine. Look at that girl instead. Her leg is rotting. You can still use me," he pleaded in panic. The figure on the right administered the compound, while the one in the middle looked at Enra. The Telvan struggled a little in the deadlock, but soon he went limp. He was dropped on his rug. The trio moved to Yeron and Enra. Yeron stood up, pushing away Enra's grabbing hand. He faced the three black figures. They were 2 heads taller than him, and he wasn't a short fellow himself. He looked for their eyes, but their helmets covered them. They offered no expression. "Stay away from her," he demanded. The Dark Warriors were undeterred. The right one swept his legs. He fell to the ground and felt a heavy boot pressing down on his chest. He tried to pry it off, but the warrior pulled a gun on him, aiming for his forehead. "Yeron, stop!" Enra pleaded. The Telvan stood down. They tested him first, and it apparently came back negative, but a food package was dropped next to him. He was kept on the ground as they moved to Enra. She stood up. "Go on then, I won't resist," she said, but her eyes were full of defiance. They won't break her soul. She promised it to herself when she was first taken captive. They drew her blood, and one of the Dark Warriors crouched beside her, taking a look at her leg. The machine gave its judgment, and the figure guarding Yeron passed the syringe to his comrade. Yeron struggled, but he was powerless against the force that nailed him to the ground. Enra raised her chin and looked at the featureless mask of the black-clad warrior. The syringe was pushed into her neck, and the formula entered her body. It was strangely warm, as if they had disinfected the needle before. She was lowered to her mattress. The trio went on without a second glance. "Bastards!" Yeron screamed, but Enra hushed him. "Come here, please," she said. "Just hold me until it's over." Yeron held her tight. Tears were rushing down his face, and he could feel how Enra's breathing slowed, second by second. She soon fell asleep. "I stole your dinner. I hope you don't mind. They said we will have breakfast soon," Enra chirped. Yeron sprang up as if he was doused with cold water. Enra smiled at him. She showed him her injured leg. "Look, the infection is almost gone." And just like she said, the yellow flesh was turning blue already. Yeron's mouth was agape. How is this possible? Who are these people? "I don't know. Someone said that a new pirate faction is taking over," Enra answered. "It looks like they are smarter than the previous bunch when it comes to their workforce. I don't dare to hope for more The two Telvans sat in silence. Could these cold warriors, who have dealt death with such ease, could they be their salvation? Soon they were ordered to stand up, but it wasn't for breakfast. They were herded again, and the black-clad warriors were just as silent as before. They were led back the same way they had came from earlier, towards the exit of the ship. A great ramp opened, and bright sunlight shined upon them, blinding their eyes for a moment. They were led down the ramp. "Yeron! Yeron!" A familiar voice yelled the Telvan's name. "Yeron! It's you!" Strong hands grabbed him, and he was pulled into a wide chest. His brother held him so firm he could barely breathe. When he was finally released, Yeron could see two men in front of him. The first was his brother, and his wide grin. The second, a black-clad warrior with a red bird on his chest. Yeron looked up to his face and his jaw dropped. He was a human. "I see you didn't waste your time, brother. To whom do I owe the pleasure?" Oneron asked, turning to Enra. But she was also staring at the human. "Why are you looking at me like that?" the human asked. He looked up the ramp, searching for something, and sighed. A warrior bearing a white bird approached him. "All the hostages are being discharged, Colonel. We will be ready to return for another mission in 3 hours. Couldn't you say something to them? Like, don't be afraid, you are being rescued, for example? We wanted to keep them docile, and it was the most straightforward way to do so," the cold warrior said before he returned to his ship. Even without his helmet, he felt more machine than man. The human with the crimson bird shook his head. "Bloody Hakions. They may be the best, but these stunts they pull are ghastly." He turned to Oneron. "All right, buddy, let's get your folks to the hospital." "Hey, who's got a stretcher?" he yelled out. The 3 Telvans were gently guided away from the landing zone and towards a large white building. Some could walk on their own, but others, like Enra, were put on stretchers, just to be safe. Humans and Telvans were working in unison. Above the entrance of the landing zone, there was a large billboard. It depicted a scene similar to what was playing out below. An injured Telvan being carried by a human and a Telvan. There were also 3 short words written on it in large red letters. "Bring them home."